Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Geneviève Zubrzicki. I'm the director of the Weiser Center for Europe and Eurasia, collegiate professor of sociology, and the Weiser professor of European and Eurasian studies. Sorry. We're thrilled today to host Oleksandra Matviichuk to deliver the 2025 Distinguished Lecture on Europe. And before I say a few words about her, I want to welcome the Honorable Eileen Weiser here tonight with us, and to really welcome everyone from the community and our students and faculty. But I'm very glad to see many students here, because I think that the speaker tonight has a lot to teach us about civil rights and your engagement both at the university and outside. So thank you for coming, for taking the time. It's the end of the semester. Everyone is very busy and tired, and it's cold, so we're very grateful that you're with us tonight. Oleksandra Matviichuk leads the Center for Civil Liberties, a Ukrainian human rights NGO that was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2022. The center promotes human rights and democracy in Ukraine and the OSCE, working on legislative reforms, conducting public oversight of law enforcement agencies and the judiciary, organizing educational initiatives, and implementing international solidarity programs. She also coordinates the activities of the initiative group Euromaidan SOS, which was established in response to the violent suppression of a peaceful student protest in Kyiv in November 2013. Throughout the 3-month mass protest known as the Revolution of Dignity, thousands of volunteers provided round-the-clock legal and humanitarian assistance to persecuted individuals nationwide throughout Ukraine. Since the onset of Russian aggression in Ukraine in 2014, Euromaidan SOS has monitored political persecution in occupied Crimea. It has documented war crimes and crimes against humanity in the Donbas region, and it spearheaded international campaigns to secure the release of political prisoners held by Russian authorities. Now, in response to Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, Oleksandra Matviichuk and other partners launched the Tribunal for Putin initiative, an initiative documenting international crimes under the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court in all regions of Ukraine targeted by Russian attacks. Matviichuk has authored numerous reports submitted to various UN bodies, the Council of Europe, the European Union, the OSCE, and the International Criminal Court. Just this morning, she was telling me that she was on a Zoom meeting with the European Parliament's Special Committee on Human Rights. She received multiple awards in addition to the Nobel Peace Prize, including the Sakharov Prize from the European Parliament in 2022 and the Global Civic Leadership Award in 2024. She was also named one of the 25 most influential women of the world by the Financial Times in 2022. So it's really a huge honor to have her with us at the University of Michigan, and we're very grateful that you made the trip all the way from Ukraine to be with us. And I should say, for those of you who don't know, coming from Ukraine nowadays to the US is a long trek. You need to drive, in this case, drive to Moldova, fly from Moldova to Warsaw, Warsaw to Amsterdam, Amsterdam to Detroit. So it takes, 24 hours or more. So thank you for really taking the time to be with us and to travel to us. And universities, I want to add, universities and particularly public institutions like our own have unique roles to fulfill. And this is why we invite people like Ms. Matviichuk. Because we not only educate and empower the next generation, but we also serve as a space where diverse viewpoints and perspectives can be freely expressed, evaluated, and critiqued. So I want to take this opportunity to remind everyone that the university's commitment to freedom of expression does not extend to the right to substantially disrupt or interfere with the lawful speech of others. And we will have a Q&A session after Ms. Matviichuk's lecture. And I invite you to ask questions at that moment. And you will notice we have 2 microphones on each side of the room, so people can line up behind to pose their questions. And if you are unable to go to the microphone, you can raise your hand and a staff member will bring a microphone to you. So now that I've shared important information with you, I want to ask you to join me in welcoming Oleksandra Matviichuk to the podium to deliver the 2025 Lecture on Europe. Please. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me to the university. It's an honor for me to have opportunity to speak to this distinguished audience. When I was a child in a school, I met Soviet dissidents. Suddenly, I found myself in a circle of a very noble people. The people who say what they think and do what they say. People who had the courage to speak out against the entire totalitarian Soviet machine. Dissidents were brutally repressed by Soviet power. Some people were killed, some people were jailed in Soviet gulag, some people were sent to forcible psychological treatment, but they didn't give up. They have no tools, just their own words and their own position. And from that time, I know that it's eventually not so little. As a child, I was so impressed by this example that I decided to study law and to continue this fight for freedom and for human dignity. That is why I became a human rights lawyer. And I have been applying the law to defend people and human dignity for many years. But now I'm in a situation when the law doesn't work. Russia has started the war of aggression against Ukraine, and the entire UN system of peace and security can't stop it. There is no justification for Russia's action. There is no legitimate reason in doing this. When large-scale war started, we united our efforts with dozens of organizations from different regions. We built a national network of local documentators and covered the whole country, including the occupied territories. And working together, we jointly documented more than 84,000 episodes of war crimes. 84,000. It's a huge number, but still just a tip of iceberg. Russia uses war crimes as the methods of warfare. Russia attempts to break people's resistance and occupy the country by the tool which I call the immense pain of civilian population. We document something more than just violations of Geneva and Hague Conventions. We document human pain. While this war turns people into the numbers, we are returning people their names. That is what we are literally doing, because people are not numbers. Life of each person matters. Let me tell you one story from our database. It is a story of 10-year-old boy Ilya from Mariupol. When the Russians tried to siege the city, they didn't allow International Committee of Red Cross to open a green corridor and to evacuate civilians. Hence, Ilya and his mother, like other people in Mariupol, had to hide in a basement of their residential building from the Russian shelling. They melted snow to have water, and they made fires to cook at least some food. But when supplies ran out, they were forced to go out, and suddenly they appeared in the center of Russian shelling. Ilya's mother was wounded in her head, and the boy's legs were torn. With the last of your strength, his mother dragged your son to the friend apartment. It was no medical assistance, because prior to this, Russians deliberately destroyed maternity hospital and entire medical infrastructure in Mariupol. So in the friend apartment, they lay down on the couch and just hugged each other. They were lying like this for several hours. And this 10-year-old boy, Ilya, told to my colleague that his mother died and got frozen right in his arms. As a human rights lawyer, I have a question. How we people in 21st century will defend human beings, their lives, their freedom, and their human dignity? Can we rely on the law, or does just brutal force matter? The answer to this question is important not just for people in Ukraine, in Iran, in Syria, in Myanmar, Nicaragua, or Venezuela. The answer to this question will define our common future. And I'm here to speak about the role of civil society in an era of global change. Based on my experience, I have something to share with you. What is the difference between civil society and population? States that experienced authoritarianism have a common feature. They may have a large population, but still a small number of citizens. Living in fear produced a certain way of thinking, like we are ordinary people, nothing depends on us, and anyway, there are not us who take any decisions. This is learned helplessness syndrome in action, when a person voluntarily renounces his or her subjectivity. A person becomes a citizen not upon receiving a passport, but when the area of his or her responsibility begins to encompass broader categories. A person becomes a citizen when he or she feels responsible for the local community, for the country, or even for the world in general. Citizens who start to act for the public good in their country are civil society. In authoritarian countries, any act for public good that is not controlled by the government is severely persecuted, and therefore they may be a large population, but a fairly limited circle of civil society. It may seem that there is no way out of this trap. No freedom, no developed civil society. No developed civil society, no freedom. But the history of humankind convincingly proved that this is not so. Our Ukrainian example also testifies to this. It's also showed that freedom isn't free. 11 years ago, I lived in an authoritarian country. The pro-Russian president and his surrounding controlled our government, parliament, and judiciary. People's opinion have turned into fiction. Sociology indicated that only 8% of people answered that they engage in public activities. That is, they invest their private resources like time, skills, money, etc. to achieve public good. Everything changed at one point when 11 years ago, the police brutally beat students who were peacefully protesting against the decision of government to stop the Euro-integration process. These videos where police beat girls and boys, dragged their hair, and smashed their faces spread across the country, despite the fact that controlled television didn't show anything. The fact that the regime doesn't respect people to the point of beating and maiming children was an insult to dignity. Dignity has a transformative power, and suddenly people who weren't interested in politics, who was population, turned into citizens. Millions of people stood up against the pro-Russian, authoritarian, and corrupt regime. They took to the streets across the country. They peacefully fight just for a chance to build a country where the rights of everybody are protected, government is accountable, judiciary is independent, and police do not beat students who are peacefully demonstrating. At the time, I has launched the Euromaidan SOS initiative. We united several thousands of people to provide legal and other kind of assistance to persecuted protesters across the country. All these months, we worked around the clock. Every day, hundreds and hundreds of people who were beaten, arrested, tortured, accused in fabricated criminal charges passed through our care. It was a very dangerous time when criminal groups Titushki collaborated with the police coordinated their actions with the prosecutors. The special service, the courts, the government, the president, and the vast majority of parliament all were against us. Under such conditions, it was easy to give up and say that nothing could be done. Nevertheless, our lawyers and our volunteers fought honestly and devotedly for every person, for each procedural means, as if the law existed. And it's produced unexpected result. We started at the legal level, but reached a kind of symbolical level where ideas and senses were merged. And everyone in Maidan knew that there is no guarantees. You can be beaten, abducted, or jailed. After all, you could be even killed, but they were people who would fight for you, who would not abandon you and your family under any circumstances. And this understanding provides a strength to people to overcome the fear. The revolution of dignity succeeded, but we paid the ultimate price for a chance to build our country. The police shot more than 100 peaceful protesters in the center square of Kyiv. People died under the flag of Ukraine and the European Union. When the authoritarian regime fell, Ukraine got its chance for the quick democratic transition. And in order to stop us on this way, Russia invaded. Russia occupied Crimea and part of the eastern regions of Ukraine in 2014, and in 2022, Russia extended this war to the large-scale invasion. Because Putin is not afraid of NATO. Putin, as every dictator, is afraid of the idea of freedom. What is the situation with the freedom in the world? Last year, half of the population in the world went to elections. But don't be an illusion. 80% of people in the globe live in non-free or partially free societies. This means that people who have a real right to vote for whom they want to vote, who have a real right to say what they think, to love whatever their heart tell them to love, and to choose freely to whom God they want to pray, these people are the minority. The problem is not only in that fact that in authoritarian countries, the space for freedom is shrinking to the size of the prison cell. The problem is that even in developed democracies, people started to put into question the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. There are reasons for this. The current generations inherited democracy from their parents. They began to take rights and freedoms for granted. They have become consumers of democracy. They understand freedom as a possibility to make a choice between different cheeses in supermarket. And that is why they start easily exchange their freedom for economic benefits, for populist claims, for promises of security, and first and foremost, for their own comfort. But the problem is that freedom is very fragile. You can't attain to your freedom once and forever. We made our own choice every day. And in addition to it, we have a rapid development of new technologies. People spend more and more time in digital reality, which is overloaded with fakes and disinformation. It's led to a situation that people are losing their ability to make a distinction between truth and lie. And now we have a situation that people in one small community have no more shared reality. Without shared reality, people have no common actions. Without common actions, people can lose their freedom and their democracy. Maybe we could afford to live like this if we have peaceful times. But sorry, our times are not peaceful. We live in an era of global change. I don't know how historians in future will call this historical period, but the international order, which is based on UN Charter and international law, is collapsing before our eyes. The UN international system of peace and security was created last century after the Second World War. It provided unjustified indulgences for victorious states. It did cope more or less with global challenges before, but now it's just stalling. It's reproducing ritualistic movements. The work of Security Council is paralyzed. And it's easy to predict that such fires like wars will emerge more and more frequently in different parts of the globe because the whole international wiring is faulty and sparks are everywhere. And even the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, it's not just a war between two states. This is a war between two systems, authoritarianism and democracy. With this war, Putin attempts to convince the entire world that freedom, democracy, human rights, rule of law are fake values because they couldn't protect anyone during the war. Putin attempts to convince that country with a strong military potential and nuclear weapon can break international order, can dictate its rules to entire international community, and even forcibly changed internationally recognized borders. And if Putin succeeds, it will encourage other authoritarian leaders in different parts of the globe to do the same. I live in Kyiv, and my native city, like thousands of other Ukrainian cities, are constantly being shelled, not just by Russian rockets, but also by Iranian drones. China helps Russia to circumvent sanctions and import technologies critical to warfare. North Korea sent to Russia 1 million artillery shells, and recently they deployed their troops to Russia. We are dealing with the formation of entire authoritarian bloc. All these regimes have something in common. All these regimes which captured power in their own countries have the same idea what a human being is. Authoritarian leaders consider people as object of control. They deny them in their rights and freedoms. They physically exterminate civil society. Democracies, even not being ideal, consider people, their rights and freedoms to be the highest value. And there is no way to negotiate it because only existence of free world always provides a threat to dictatorship to lose their power. I have been working with the law for many years, and I know from my own experience when you can't rely on the legal instruments, when you can't rely on the UN system of peace and security, you can still rely on people. We get used to thinking through the categories of states and interstate organizations, but ordinary people have much great power that they can even imagine. When the full-scale invasion began, not only Putin, but also the leaders of democratic countries didn't think that Ukraine has a strength to resist to such enormous opposing power. Russia has strong military potential, nuclear weapon, a veto power in UN Security Council, oil and gas, which means a lot of money, 140 million population. For the time, when Russia invaded, Russia had an 11th economy in the world. You can read the news and analytics in February 2022. Almost everyone was convinced that Ukraine would fall just in 3 or 4 days. Immediately after the invasion, international organizations evacuated their personnel. They left us alone. I was in Kyiv when Russian troops tried to circle my city. I refused to evacuate, and with a part of my team, we continue our work on the ground. I remember that first weeks of large-scale war, we celebrated each morning like a victory, because we have stand one more night. But ordinary people remained, and it were ordinary people who supported those in the combat zone, who took people out from the ruined cities, who helped to survive under artillery's fire, who rescued people trapped under the rubble of residential buildings, who break the encirclement to provide humanitarian aid. Ordinary people started to do extraordinary things. And suddenly, it became obvious that ordinary people fighting for their freedom and human dignity are stronger than even the second army in the world, that ordinary people can change the history quicker than UN intervention. I would never wish anyone to go through our experience, because the war probably is the most horrible thing which just can happen in the human life. But these dramatic times provide us an opportunity to express the best in us, to be courageous, to fight for freedom, to take burden of responsibility, to make a difficult but right choices, and to help each other. Because only when we help in each other, when people risked their lives for others whom they never met before, only in that acute moment, we are aware what does it mean to be human. And I'm here to say that despite everything, the story of Ukraine, it's a life-affirming story, because the dramatic times, they raise hope. Because when freedom is denied, it becomes powerfully break out through every concrete individuals. And I'm here to say that in different countries worldwide, in this concrete moment, many people also fight for their freedom and human dignity. Sometimes this fight may seem to be senseless because they face with enormous opposing power, but the total history of humankind convincingly proves that we haven't given up. Even when we have no tools, we always have our own words and our own position. And eventually, it's not so little. And I'm here to say that we still have a hope. Because even when you can't change something with your personal efforts, you have to know that without your personal efforts, nothing will be changed. And hope, it's not a confidence that everything will be fine. Hope, it's a deep understanding that all our efforts have a huge meaning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Oleksandra, for this inspiring lecture. I want to remind everyone that we have 2 microphones on each side, and if you are unable to go to the microphone, we will bring one to you. And I will start by asking you a question, because when you're talking about the strength of civil society that resides in individuals. I'm reminded also of other moments in history where things change thanks to solidarity, namely thinking of the solidarity movement in 1980 in Poland. But the international context was different at that moment. And what we're seeing now is that Ukraine is fighting, has allies in Europe, but one of the key supporters to this, until recently, to Ukraine, was the United States, and now is less so. So how do you, you are speaking all over Europe, North America, how do you keep hope and try also to work within institutions where there's less consensus about the war in Ukraine and what we can do to help you keep hope?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this question. First, let me explain something which probably not very visible for international community. People in Ukraine want peace much more than anyone else. But peace doesn't come when country which was invaded stop fighting. That's not peace. That's Russian occupation. An occupation in the same war, but just in another form. Occupation is not just changing one state flag to another. Russian occupation means torture, rapes, enforced disappearances, denial of your identity, forcible adoption of your own children, filtration camps, and mass graves. Let me illustrate it with one story. This is a story of children's writer Volodymyr Vakulenko. He wrote beautiful stories for Ukrainian children, and entire generations brought up on his Deities book. During Russian occupation, Volodymyr disappeared. I know his family. His family hoped to the last that he's alive, but like thousands of other Ukrainian civilians are illegally held in Russian captivity. But when Ukrainian army released Kharkiv region, we found mass grave in a forest. I show it during my presentation. In the mass grave, under the number 319, we found the dead bodies of children's writer Volodymyr Vakulenko. You can ask me, for what Russians killed children's writer who write fairy tales and stories for children? The answer is simple, because they could. So we have no other choice. If we stop resisting to Russian aggression, we will cease to exist. And that is why it's so important support of United States and other countries, because yes, Russia is an enormous opposing power. And we can't fight with Russians with the bare hands. And we can't make Russia to stop, even on this line which we have for current moment. They move further. I think that the problem is in the current geopolitical situation that we lost the human dimension of this war. What do I mean? When President Trump announced that he will start a peace negotiation with Russians in order to stop this war, since this time, we heard a lot about natural minerals, about Russia's territorial claims, about geopolitical interests, even about Zelensky's suit. But we don't hear about people. They don't discuss what will be with more than 20,000 Ukrainian children illegally deported to Russia. These children were separated with their families, were put in Russian re-education camps. They told they are not Ukrainian children, they are Russian children. Their families refused from them, and they will be adopted by Russian families who will bring them up with Russians. What will be with thousands and thousands illegally detained civilians, men and women, as well as prisoners of the war? I personally interviewed hundreds of people who survived Russian captivity. They told me how they were beaten, raped, smashed into wooden boxes, their fingers were cut, their nails were torn away, their nails were drilled. They were electrically shocked through their own genitalia. One woman told me how her eye was dug out with a spoon. Knowing this, you have a clear understanding that part of these people have no chance to be alive till the end of these peace negotiations. What will be with people in occupation in general? We speak about millions. They have no tools how to defend themselves, how to defend their right, their freedom, their property, their life, their children, their beloved ones. We can't leave them alone for torture and death under Russian occupation. We have no moral rights. So I think that we have to return the human dimension into all political process when we speak about the question how we can stop this Russian war of aggression against Ukraine. Because people have to be first.
Thank you. We have a question here. So I will ask everyone who wants to ask a question to be brief, please. And perhaps say your name, or if you're a student here, to say so. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Hannah. I'm a PhD student. I'm from Ukraine, so I'm really pleased to have you here. Thank you. Welcome. So during your speech, you mentioned that international institutions crumbled, and I cannot say that I disagree. Especially many Ukrainians rely on decision of International Criminal Court. We sort of believe in that as an institution of the last help, last resort, but we could observe that it doesn't work. Specifically, our neighboring countries welcome the people who should be banned or should be captured according to International Criminal Court. So do you have your professional opinion on how the system of enforcement of International Criminal Court decision should work? Should it be based on power? Should it be based on sanctions? And how to ensure that all countries will be taken accountable?
Thank you for your question. It's complicated, and I will try to be brief in answering. Let me start that International Criminal Court is a part of the international system of peace and security. It's a part of existing world order, which, as I mentioned in my speech, is collapsed. Let me illustrate it with another example. In 2022, UN Court of Justice issued preliminary decisions and obliged Russia immediately withdraw their troops from Ukraine. Russia ignored even the decision of UN Court of Justice. So what other legal instruments we can use to stop these atrocities? There is nothing. But it's not first time in a human history when people found themselves that the law doesn't work. And I hope that is temporarily. I see our obligations in starting to push for cardinal reform for entire system of peace and security. Not just for people in Ukraine. This system has to be able to effectively defend people regardless in what country they live. Regardless whether or not they live in a country with a strong military potential or a country which belongs to some military bloc. Regardless whether this country has oil and gas and other countries will close their eyes for all atrocities with this concrete regime is doing towards its own people. So we need another type of international system. And we have to push for cardinal reforms. Because look, Russia, Iran, China, North Korea, they are also pushing for their vision how the new world order has to look like. And there is nothing new in their vision. It's a vision that justice is a privilege, that if you have power, you can do whatever you want, that if you are strong, you are in the first places of the hierarchy of violence. The world of such hierarchy, it's a world of wars. It's obvious. And in order to prevent the mass violence, we have to do something. And justice is just a component of the global problem which we observe for current moment. I will stop here. Thank you once again for your question.
Follow up with what you just said. So how do you initiate a cardinal reform of basically an entire system if separate institutions are failing at the moment?
It's a good question. I still rely on people. I spoke with presidents, with members of parliaments, with members of governments from different countries. They either not interested or don't feel strength to start such cardinal reforms. Because you have to find an answers to the very complicated questions. Let me name just several of them. First, we call United Nations, but this system doesn't represent nations. Let's be honest, a lot of countries who vote in General Assembly, they represent only the current elite which captured power in their countries. So the first question, how to provide a voice for nations? Second question, we call United Nations international organizations. But it's not international organization, it's inter-states organization. And what the difference is, each state tried to promote its own national interests. And nothing bad in it, but who will promote international interest, the interest of humanity? Who will think not about national interest, but about the world as such? So this is a second question. How to build this international architecture in a way to present interest of humanity, not the interest of some concrete countries. The third question, how to make the system that it will be based not in the size of country or level of GDP, but on human rights and freedoms. So I think that people who find the answer to this question will receive the Nobel Peace Prize.
Sir.
Hi, my name is Frank Monticello. I'm from New Jersey, been an activist for my entire life. I was instrumental in organizing the Hands Off rally on Saturday. And before I get to my question, do you have someone who handles your media appointments? If they do, Jon Stewart, CBS Sunday Morning, PBS NewsHour, hopefully. But here's my question. You probably know more than most of us. You've lived it in Eastern Europe. You've been close to Russia. You know a lot of Russians. Pretend this is an audience of Russian citizens. You're sitting there and you're telling them, this weekend, we're going to have a Hands Off Ukraine rally. What restrictions would these people experience in Russia if they were Russian citizens once they leave this room? And I just wonder, lambs to slaughter. We are potentially lambs to slaughter in this country, but Russian citizens, what is their view, in your opinion, on the war if they were able to express it?
Thank you very much for your questions. It can provide me opportunity to take different focuses, so I'll choose just several ones. Frankly speaking, I don't find proper words to speak to the Russian population in general. Because the problem is that it's not just a war of one people. It's not Putin's war. It's Russian war. The problem is that majority of Russians still have this imperialist mentality. Russia is empire. Empire has a center but has no borders. Empire always strives to expand. It's a nature of empire. And the problem is that when in the past century the Nazi war criminals were tried in Nuremberg trials, the Soviet Gulag was never condemned or punished for all atrocities which Soviet Gulag did towards its own people. This means that this culture has a long-lasting tradition of impunity. And that is why Russians committed horrible crimes in Chechnya, in Moldova, in Georgia, in Mali, in Libya, in Syria, in other countries of the world. They have never been punished. They believe they can do whatever they want. And unfortunately, majority of Russians still believe that they have a right to invade to another country, to kill people there, to erode their identity, and to call everything which they captured that this is Russian land. It's not a question of rational argument. We speak about culture. It's something more deeper. It can be deconstructed in a different way, and justice is just one of them. When I speak with my Russian friends and colleagues, Russian human rights defenders, how to deconstruct this culture based on impunity, this culture which provides Russians to support this bloody war. I remember the one report which Human Rights Center Memorial in Russia published a year ago. They analyzed Russian tactics in Chechnya, in Syria, and in Ukraine. And they told, this is the same war crime playbook. They titled this report, The Chain of Wars, Chain of Crimes, Chain of Impunity. So one direction which we discussed with Russian human rights defenders, how to deconstruct this culture, is to break this chain, to demonstrate justice, to show Russian people that it's not okay to invade another country. And that is why we are working hard to create a special tribunal on aggression, and I'm glad to announce that we are on the final stage. Fingers crossed, but if everything will be fine, this special tribunal on aggression will be created in the frame of Council of Europe. Unfortunately, it's not possible to create it in a frame of United Nations because there are a lot of countries which are neutral, and they think that justice is a privilege just to winners. And we are doing this not just for people in Ukraine, and not just for people in other countries who suffered from Russian war crimes before. We are doing this also in order to prevent a next Russian attack to the next nation. Because once again, empire has a center, but empire has no borders. Empire always tries to expand.
Before going to the next question, I just want to follow up on what you said, because we hosted, as you know, Vladimir Karamurza a couple of weeks ago. He was a little bit more hopeful about Russian civil society. He talked about the repression of Russian civil society, but pockets where people actually showed that they were not supportive of the Putin regime. Do you think he's too hopeful or naive? Or he made the point that Russian empires in the 19th century and the 20th century actually fell within 3 days without any, announcement, basically, that it would happen when it does. What do you think about that?
I think that there is no contradiction with what I just told and what Vladimir Karamurza mentioned. He is my good friend and colleague. I also hopeful about Russian civil society. The problem is that it's too small. The problem that they are marginal. The problem is that they face not just with the Putin repressive machine, but with the majority of public opinion in Russia. And that is why I always emphasize that we have to highlight the bravery of Russian human rights defenders and other civil society actors who fight for people and human dignity in situations when the law doesn't work in Russia. They are extremely brave. Probably people can think, but what's the difference? They have no influence. The difference is huge because they serve like a moral kamerton for Russian society. They show that even in such authoritarian regime, you can have your own words and your own position. And the truth is also that Russian civil society is severely persecuted. Just one last case which impressed me very much, especially because Ukrainian human rights defenders and Russian human rights defenders got information about this case only when it was too late. It's a case of young pianist Pavel Kusnir from Birobidzhan. He started hunger strike because he was illegally jailed for his anti-war texts and videos. And he died. And nobody knows that he exists, that he made this anti-war text and videos. He has very small audience. Nobody knows that he started hunger strike. We all get information about this brave young musician only when it was too late.
Thank you very much for this very powerful talk, and thank you to the WCEE Center for hosting you. My name is Oleksandra Matviichuk, and I'm an assistant professor of Ukrainian literature and culture here at the University of Michigan. I have a question, a very practical one. To what extent your legal assistance extends to the peoples on the occupied territories? Because many of them are going through horrible things. Many of them are deprived of basic rights. Many of them are repressed, put in prisons. Their property is taken away. Are you in touch with any of those victims? Are you collaborating with the other legislators, with the whole system that was established in the occupied territories? Because if you want to defend them, you have to somehow negotiate with the occupiers. So to what extent this is happening, if at all? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Only law can provide predictability. But when the law doesn't work, you have to be very creative. And in our database, we have, for current moment, more than 4,000 requests from help from people in occupied territories because their members of families were legally detained. And for us, the only way how to identify where they are, to provide them some support, for example, if it's possible to send parcel with medicine, to send independent lawyer who can't change the verdict in future, but at least will provide information to the family what's going on with this person. All these simple actions, it's possible because of our work with Russian human rights defenders. And this is once again a good opportunity for me to say that we are very grateful for them, for their work in such circumstances, knowing that they can be in jail tomorrow as well. Because part of my colleagues were forced to leave the country, part of them were jailed, others are working under the constant threat that it will happen tomorrow. So this is how we work. We build invisible ties for societies, and in such a way we continue this dissident tradition when dissidents from different republics of Soviet Union also coordinated their efforts and trying jointly to fight with the evil we tried to dominate in our part of the world. Let me illustrate to you the situation in occupied territories with the situation of children. We have in occupied territories approximately 1,600,000 children. They're going through forcible erosion of their identity. They teach Russian textbook, and this Russian textbook, Ukraine does not exist. They prohibited to speak Ukrainian language. They can be persecuted if they will manifest Ukrainian culture. They also going through the forcible militarization, starting from kindergarten. We see this system where Russians force their parents to send their children to so-called re-education camps or sports camps in occupied territories and in Russia itself, for example, in Chechnya. In these camps, Ukrainian children wearing military uniform, they marching, and they teach how to use weapons. And third trend which they are going through was, I understood it only when I started to speak with experts who provide rehabilitation for children returned from occupation or deportation. Russians raise these children in unquestionable obedience. They raise them in a way that they reprogramming Ukrainian children into authoritarian software, like that these children, when they will become adults, they have this vision of the world that nothing depends on their will. They have always just to fulfill the orders. So what we have erosion of identity, militarization, and unquestionable obedience. And we have 1,600,000 Ukrainian children who are going through this. And we have no legal tools how to stop it. So what I want to conclude, it's not just Ukrainian problem that poor Ukrainian children are suffering in occupied territories. It's a security problem. Because what Russians are doing, they're preparing a next generation of Putin soldiers with unquestionable obedience once again. And this is a threat not just for Ukraine. This is a threat to entire world. Because when I interviewed people survived from Russian captivity, they told me that Russians see their future like this. First, we'll occupy Ukraine, and then, together with you, we will go to conquer in other countries.
The children, are they mostly orphans, or were they taken also from families with one parent or imprisoned parents?
When we speak about 1,600,000 children, these children with parents, majority of orphans were illegally deported to Russia. But not just orphans, we have 20,000 identified Ukrainian children who were illegally deported, and some of them have parents who were killed by Russians, but they still have relatives who want to return them home, or some of them have parents who were jailed by Russians. And despite the fact that they have parents jailed by Russians, they are going through the procedure of forcible adoption. And what the problem is, the Russian legislation provides opportunity for a Russian adoptive family to change not just name of child, but also place of birth and time of and date of birth. This means that even if 3-year-old kids have parents arrested by Russians, after some time, it's impossible for parents to find their child, because this 3-year-old child will not remember who he or she is.
So my name is Derek Groom. I work for the Weiser Center for Europe and Eurasia. And I have the privilege to work on one of our key initiatives, the NGO Leadership Workshop, which we run with the William Davidson Institute, that's housed in the business school here at U of M, and local partners in the region. So we provide 1-week-long training, management training for civil society leaders from the region. And since 2022, we've provided it for only Ukrainian organizations. So our last 3 workshops, spanning back to that time, we've had almost 100 Ukrainian leaders come to our workshop. So I've seen firsthand, the vibrant civil society that you have in Ukraine. And I'm just curious if you can share some insight on the relationship that civil society in Ukraine has right now with the current government. Because of course, even as Slovakia, for example, with their new administration, it's been a really horrific clampdown on NGOs there. So I'm just curious to hear how that is, because of course, a lot of organizations that we've worked with at our workshops provide support for victims of the war, but there's also organizations that are working on anti-corruption and change in government. So interested to see how the reception is.
Thank you very much. As I mentioned in my speech, 11 years ago, we lived in authoritarian country. And when the Revolution of Dignity succeeded and we got the chance to start democratic reforms, Russia invaded. So for all these 11 years of wars, we have 2 tasks to do parallel. First, to defend our country, our people, and our democratic future. And second, to implement democratic reforms. And you live in a country which built your democratic institutions for centuries. And every country which going through the period of transition know that it's hard to make a jump and to build such democratic institutions, even during the peaceful time. We have just 11 years, and we have no peaceful time. We have to do it during the time of wars. So we are a nation in transit. We are not perfect democracy. We on the right path, but still we have a lot to do in our country with judiciary, with corruption, with legislation, with all fields of society. And we as a civil society feel our responsibility for it. So our relation with government is complicated. I mean, we strongly support everything which Ukrainian government is doing to defend Ukraine, because they represent our interest. We want to survive in this war which has genocidal intent. And we push our government to be more ambitious and to conduct reforms and to focus on the reforms even during the large-scale war. Once again, it's difficult because the war has its own logic, and this logic is opposite to the logic of democratization. The logic of the war dictates centralization. The logic of democratization dictates decentralization. The logic of the war dictates limitation of human rights and freedoms due to security requirements. For example, we have curfew in my city. The logic of democratization dictates that you have to expand the space for rights and freedoms. So it's cardinal two different logics, and we have to balance between these two logics, which is difficult. But what we have as leverage as civil society, and I even call it as a God blessing, we have the Euro-integration process. Euro-integration process with a clear indicators what has to be done in order for our country to be able to join the European Union. And for us, why it's a leverage? Because we can convince not just Ukrainian authorities, but also Ukrainian population that if we will not concentrate just only on survival issues, but we will be ambitious, and during the large-scale war, we will continue to move further on the path which was underlined by Revolution of Dignity, we'll succeed in our historical goal. We will return to European civilized dimension, and we will cut forever our ties with the Russian world.
We could end on those words since they are so powerful. But I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about Ukrainian, different opinions within Ukraine about an eventual ceasefire and peace treaty. The war has been going on for more than 3 years now, enormous suffering, and people are tired. On the one hand, Zelensky has shown willingness to compromise and to, meet Russia somewhere to have a ceasefire, which is so far not happening. You travel throughout the country, so what is the different moods, or what is the level of support for a ceasefire at this point?
For sure, people in Ukraine want peace. It's very difficult and exhausting to live during the large-scale war, because it means that you live in total uncertainty. You can't plan not just your day, you can't plan your next several hours. You have no idea what will happen. To live during the large-scale war means that everything which you call normal life was ruined, just in one moment. Possibility to go to work, to hug your beloved ones, to have family dinners, to meet with your friends in cafe. It's disappeared as a possibility for a lot of people in Ukraine in one moment. When large-scale war started, every second family in Ukraine was separated. Every second family. Now we have 7.5 million people abroad, which left country because of the large-scale war, and they can't return because they can't get used to live during the constant Russian bombardment. For example, my mother. She called me every day and she's crying. She told when I can return home. And she tried. She returned home because now her home is not under occupation in Kyiv region. But in 2 days, Russians sent dozens of ballistic missiles, and my mother packed her baggage and left the country again. It's difficult. But all people in Ukraine know that Russians started this large-scale war not because they want to occupy Bakhmut or Avdiivka. It's very naive to think. Putin started this large-scale war because he wants to occupy and destroy the whole country. And he won't move further. He sees Ukraine like a bridge to Europe. He dreams about his legacy. He wants to forcibly restore Russian empire. It's very naive to think that Putin sees his name in the world history like a person who occupied Avdiivka and Bakhmut, and for this reason started large-scale war. Do you know where Avdiivka and Bakhmut are on the map? Probably you know because you're interested in Ukrainian case. But frankly speaking, Majority of Ukrainians don't know where Avdiivka and Bakhmut before large-scale war started. It's not Berlin. It's not Washington. It's not Rome. It's Avdiivka and Bakhmut, very important cities for Ukraine, but not so important for Putin to start this war. The problem is that after a large-scale war, all these 3 years, despite all human losses, Putin doesn't refuse from his goal, because human life is the cheapest resource for the Russian state. And that is why, knowing this, Ukrainians are speaking about security guarantees. How to make this peace sustainable as a result of these negotiations. How to make Putin understand that it will be impossible for him to achieve this goal, to destroy and occupy the whole country, not just to postpone this goal in a time. Because we had previous example. This war started not in February 2022. This war started in February 2014. And when Putin occupied Crimea and part of eastern regions, we had so-called ceasefire. We have 2 Minsk peace agreements with Russia. And Ukraine has a 0 chance to return these territories. How Russians use this 8 years of peace agreement? They violate ceasefire almost every day. People were dying. They produced artillery shells. They transferred the former Crimean resort into a powerful military base. They prepared the economy for the next wave of sanctions. And they started large-scale war. Sorry, we don't want the story to repeat. We want a sustainable peace.
I think that the lessons that you're teaching us about what Ukrainians want and need and deserve are also lessons that apply everywhere. You were talking about our democracy and our institutions, and we need to defend them also. And your example at the beginning that the population of a country is not the nation or not citizens until they actually take part in civil society, I think is a very powerful message, and is, as a new American, this is something that I care deeply about myself, that this is our democracy and we need to also protect it. So this is not this is not something that happens only somewhere far away that is new to democracy. This is something that, as you said, this is a daily practice, and this is a responsibility. So I thank you for actually coming all the way from Ukraine to Ann Arbor, Michigan, to remind us of our civic duties.
Let me share one positive story. You can refer to this story in a time when probably you will start to think that you lose hope. This story is about revolution of dignity, because it was a time when we faced with entire state machine. And this entire state machine want to liquidate peaceful protest, even physically. And this feeling of learned helplessness start to emerge, because people start to think, but what we can do when prosecutors, courts, parliaments, everyone are against us. And in order to overcome this feeling, Ukrainian artists made a beautiful series of posters. And one poster was the poster with a drop. And it was a title, "We are a drop in the ocean." Which means that yes, we are human beings, we are not gods. And probably with my individual efforts, I can't change the situation. But together, we are ocean. And people, they printed these posters, they put it in their working place, they made graffiti, And this become a symbol of something very inspirational for people in Ukraine, that together we are ocean. Together we can change this history for better.
And we want to thank you for your work in Ukraine on behalf of the Ukrainian people. And I can say that we are also with Ukraine. We stand with Ukraine and we support the values on which Ukraine stands and for which they are fighting this war. So thank you very much for coming, and we will follow your work and continue supporting Ukraine at the University of Michigan and in the US. Thank you. Thank you everyone for coming.